Manifestation was never meant to be this complicated, but somehow it's turned into this overwhelming process full of rituals, rules, and routines that leave people feeling more lost than empowered. The truth is, it was always meant to be simple. Neville Goddard didn't teach it like a course with levels to complete. He taught it like a shift in identity. One internal movement, from the version of self that doesn't have what's wanted, to the version of self that already does. But somewhere along the way, the simplicity got buried under a pile of techniques. It became a checklist: affirm every day, journal childhood wounds, rewrite old stories, raise vibration, script in present tense, visualize in detail. Do it at night, do it in the morning, do it when emotional, don't do it when emotional, surrender but not too much, detach but still care. And suddenly, what started as a beautiful idea that imagination creates reality became a job. A job that never ends. A job where results always feel just out of reach. But that's the trick of the old self. It doesn't want to let go of control. It wants to earn the desire. It wants to prove it deserves it. So it keeps creating problems that need fixing. Things to heal, energies to shift, beliefs to rewire. And as long as that identity is being lived in, nothing actually changes. Because even though 100 things are being done, they're all being done from the same state, the state of not having it. Neville wasn't trying to create a self-help empire. He was trying to show something simple. Whatever is assumed to be true will be lived out in the 3D. That's it. And that's powerful, because it means nothing has to be chased. It means the outer world doesn't have to be fixed. It means what's wanted is already finished, already created, already waiting to be stepped into. But the only way in is to drop the old identity and take on a new one. Not someday, not after becoming more ready, but now, in imagination, in belief, in silence. So if things feel hard, if the process feels heavy, maybe the real work isn't adding more to the routine. Maybe the real work is stripping it all back to the core truth. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and live from there. There's a core message Neville repeated over and over, a message so simple that it's easy to overlook in the search for something more complicated. And that message is, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Live from the end. Not just think about the end. Not just wish it would happen, but to live from the place where it already has. That's not metaphor. That's not poetry. That's literal instruction. But the reason so many people miss it is because the old self doesn't want to surrender that easily. The old self wants to do something, to work for it, to earn it. So instead of resting in the assumption, there's effort, there's pressure, there's fear, there's checking the 3D every hour. There's asking, is this working? Am I doing it right? Should I do more? And every one of those questions comes from the wrong state. Because when the desire is already done in consciousness, there's no reason to question it. The assumption takes care of itself. That's why Neville always returned to identity. Not affirmations, not effort, identity. Because the only thing that ever manifests is the state that's being lived in. Not the words being spoken, not the techniques being followed, but the silent, invisible, constant inner state. That's what creates. So if someone keeps imagining their desire but still feels like the version of themselves who doesn't have it, then the desire stays out there, in the future, in the dream, never landing in reality. Because it hasn't been embodied. Living from the end means stepping into the reality of it's already done, and feeling the peace of that. Not the high, not the hype, but the calm, the neutrality, the knowing, the state of course this is mine. That's the state that hardens into fact. That's the identity that draws the desire like a magnet. And it's not loud. It's not flashy. It's subtle. It's simple. It's the still voice in the background that says, I don't need to force anything. I already am the version of me who has it. That's the message. That's the power. And it's always been there, quietly waiting to be accepted. This part might be hard to hear at first, but it's important. The technique is not what manifests. The scripting, the visualizing, the affirming, none of those are the real cause. They're just tools. They're meant to help shift into a new state. But if the state doesn't shift, then all the effort is just noise. It's like decorating a room but never moving in. Because the only thing that creates is consciousness, not behavior. That's why two people can do the same technique, and only one sees results. One person is doing it from knowing, the other from lack. One is moving in imagination, the other is begging in thought. It's not about the scene or the method. It's about the inner world. It's about who is being believed to be. If someone's visualizing being rich but still waking up every day feeling like a struggler, then the state hasn't changed. And the world doesn't respond to what's wanted, it responds to what's assumed. So the question isn't am I doing it right, but who am I being right now? The truth is, a single moment of real embodiment, of actually feeling that it's done, carries more weight than hours of trying. And it's not about faking the feeling. It's about leaning into it, choosing to believe it, letting it be real. That might sound subtle, but it changes everything. Because once that shift happens, the technique becomes unnecessary. The outer world just starts reflecting the new identity. And the effort, it fades, because there's no more reason to try when the desire has already been accepted. That's what makes the technique powerful. Not the repetition, but the meaning behind it, the state it helps activate. So if things aren't showing up, maybe it's time to stop chasing more tools and start choosing a new state. There's a hidden reason why manifestation starts to feel like forcing. It's not because the desire is too big or the timing is off or the universe is testing anything. It's because the version of self that's being lived in doesn't believe it has what it wants. And so, from that state, everything feels like it needs to be earned, chased, or convinced into happening. But here's the truth: you don't chase what you are. You only chase what you still believe you aren't. That's why forcing never works. It's not about action. It's about identity. The version of you who already has the desire wouldn't be forcing anything. That version would be relaxed, at peace, certain. So if there's tension, panic, or urgency, it's a sign the wrong self is active. Neville said there's no one to change but self. That's the real secret. Not changing others. Not changing the outer world. Not waiting for signs or evidence or permission. Just stepping into the version of you who doesn't need to try, because it's already done. Forcing comes from the belief that the power is somewhere out there. That something needs to shift in the 3D first. That it's not safe to assume yet. But the moment you stop trying to make it happen and start living as if it already did, you collapse the distance. The bridge begins to unfold. Not because you made it happen, but because you got out of the way. The old self will always want to interfere. It will try to convince you that more effort is needed, that more steps must be taken, that you have to prove you're worthy. But the new self doesn't need to prove anything. It simply exists in the assumption. And from that place, action becomes inspired, not pressured. Movement becomes natural, not forced. When forcing stops, receiving begins. But that shift only happens when the identity shifts first. So if the old patterns of pushing, controlling, and obsessing keep showing up, that's not something to fight. That's something to notice. It's just the old self trying to hold on. But it doesn't have to be believed anymore. Because you're not the one who tries to manifest. You're the one who already has. And the faster you can settle into that truth, the faster reality starts reflecting it. One of the deepest blocks to manifestation is the belief that something needs to be earned. That you have to become good enough, healed enough, evolved enough, spiritual enough before you're allowed to receive what you want. But that's not how any of this works. Neville never said, heal first, then assume. He said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. That means the permission is already there. The door is already open. The only thing that's ever standing in the way is the story that says, I'm not ready yet. And that story doesn't protect, it delays. Because what if readiness isn't something that happens before the manifestation? What if readiness is just a byproduct of accepting it's already yours? The belief that it has to be earned keeps you stuck in the loop of trying to improve, trying to fix, trying to deserve. And while all those things might look like growth, they're often just distractions. Because you don't manifest by fixing yourself. You manifest by shifting into the self who doesn't need fixing. That's a radical idea, especially in a world that glorifies self-help and hustle. But it's also the truth, and it's incredibly freeing, because it means the love, the money, the peace, the success, it's not something to climb toward, it's something to receive. And the receiving begins the moment you stop measuring your worth by how much inner work you've done. This doesn't mean ignoring wounds or pretending everything's fine. It means understanding that your value isn't based on how perfect your mindset is. It means realizing that you are already the operant power, not once you've mastered it. Now, as you are. When Neville said consciousness is the only reality, he meant that you don't manifest what you deserve, you manifest what you assume. So the question becomes, what are you assuming about yourself? Are you living as someone who's worthy now, or someone who has to keep proving it? Because as long as worth is being chased, the desire stays far away. But when worth is accepted, even before any change is seen, the outer world begins to bend. Not because something was earned, but because something was allowed. This is the final and maybe most important piece. The old self, the one who doubts, who begs, who panics, who checks the 3D every 5 minutes, cannot come with you. That self is not a match for the new reality. And it's not because that self is bad or wrong. It's just because that self is built on stories that don't align with what's now being chosen. And if those stories are carried into the new state, they'll keep pulling everything backward. That's why manifestation sometimes feels like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Because the assumption is shifting, but the identity isn't letting go. There's still 1 foot in the old beliefs, still 1 hand on the old version of self. But at some point, that identity has to be dropped completely. Not managed, not negotiated with, dropped. And that's scary, because it means letting go of familiar pain, familiar habits, and familiar ways of coping. But it's also the doorway into everything that's wanted. Neville said to die to the old self. Not fix it, not heal it, just let it go. And in its place, step into the new version of being, the one that already has the desire. Not as a fantasy, not as a future, as a now. That's where the bridge of incidents begins. That's where the inner calm lands. That's where life starts reflecting back the new identity. But it only happens when the old self stops being entertained. When the thoughts that say what if it doesn't happen are no longer indulged. When the feelings that scream this is too good to be true are no longer believed. The new self doesn't fight those voices. It just stops identifying with them. It hears them and chooses differently, over and over until the new becomes natural. That's how the shift happens, not in a flash of light, not from forcing alignment, but from choosing, moment after moment, to live as the one who already has it. That version already exists. It's already done. The only question is whether or not it will be stepped into and stayed in. Because the minute that version becomes home, reality has no choice but to match it. If you could rename the version of you who already has it all, what would you call them? Drop the name in the comments and start owning it.